lovelies. Today we're taking a somewhat redundant look at the D&D 2024 Player's Guide because I need those sweet clicks, and I know that that is what the bulk of people are interested in. Also, I need it for work. Do I have any biases to declare or anything here before we get going? I have done work for Wizards of the Coast in the past as a freelancer in the heady days of 3rd and 4th editions, and for other third-party companies that produce stuff for those editions. I dabbled a bit in 5e. I run a regular streamed game of D&D 5th edition, and I bought this mostly for work because, frankly, Wizards of the Coast have done little but pissed me off as a creator and a player since forever, and that continues into this edition by not really giving it an edition name. They're just calling it the 2024 edition, I believe, or that seems to be what's on all the official bump about it. So D&D 2024 is apparently what it's officially called. Most of you watching this will have already seen reviews or previews of the new D&D, so you already know most of what there is to know about it, making this review kind of redundant. So as such, this isn't really going to be a review per se, as much as a sort of discussion, I suppose, of where we all are. I also did a crude data analysis of the artwork in the book, because I know some of you have some burning questions about how woke or not it is, which generally comes through in the depictions. Less and less of a toss do I give about this sort of thing, save where it intersects with my genuine concerns about story, consistency, world creation, all of those sorts of things. But I know to a lot of people it means a lot, one way or the other. So this is really a 5.5 edition, or a 5.75, I suppose, if you consider the sort of late era changes and developments that were made to 5th edition after Tasha's, etc. That would probably be the more like the 5.5 edition, I suppose, if you're playing with all the updated rules. They might copyright claim me because of I'm showing pages, but I doubt you've got the patience to read it off a video if it's even high enough resolution, so I'm going to stick to my usual format. So yeah, style-wise, it is much more readable than 5th edition, in my opinion. It's clearer. The graphic design is much simpler, and as a result, much better than the 5th edition was. Art-wise, there's a bit of a mix. Overall, however, there is a lot more art that is more graphical in design, which put me in mind of D20 Modern. And that style of presentation is something that, to my eye, is generally a lot better than things were in 5th edition. But yeah, there's a real mix. So there's some stuff that is closer to the worst aspects of 5th edition art, I suppose. There's a few pieces I might suspect of being artificial intelligence. Personally, I'm not necessarily against AI art exactly. I think it has its place, it has its uses, but those places and uses are not in books by the market leader, the largest company that's trying to chase $1 billion of turnover, or whatever it was, in the next few years. As a re-rationalization of 5th edition and a way of starting over, I think this edition is probably needed. It has been longer than normal between editions. The industry standard for gaps between editions is about 5 years, unless you're Games Workshop, in which case it's about 3 years. So I think this is needed, certainly, given the sheer bloat of 5th edition. But it's only kind of sort of, if you squint, you know, with a strong tailwind and moving downhill, it's only somewhat backwards compatible. Whether it really fixes the big problems that have emerged in 5th edition, challenge ratings, PC survivability, yeah, those sorts of things, that remains to be seen. So we'll have to wait for the DM's guide to really know whether this is a real improvement, yeah, a significant improvement over what we had before. So the shit I liked, the graphic design and layout is improved. The relative clarity of the rules and the writing is largely improved. They give the option of descriptive words for stats, which I think is a good thing and a good prompt for people to think about how statistics might relate to the way that their character looks. When it comes to character species, it wasn't made quite as interchangeable and boring as was hinted previously in the 5th edition supplementary material. It also has a quite nice rules glossary, which makes it a hell of a lot easier to look up the rules while you're playing, so that gets a big thumbs up from me. Things I didn't like so much. The de-emphasis on a character's race or species doesn't make a lot of sense, especially when you have gnomes and halflings on the one hand and Goliaths and half giants on the other. It's like expecting a mouse and an elephant to have the same physical statistics. It doesn't work for me. It throws me out, and it also goes against a great many fantasy tropes. But they didn't go quite as far as they said they were going to, so that's okay. There's a kind of strict codification of social actions. You kind of had that in 5th edition, but it was a bit less intrusive. Here it feels like there is more of a kind of set way to complete social actions with your characters, so it could well end up reducing social interactions to I use this skill on this person, in the same way that exploring traps or trying to disarm traps or doors, you know, unlocking doors, has gone from being a descriptive experience in earlier editions of D&D to just make a roll in current ones. Sometimes I don't see a problem with that. If you want to play a really social character but you have all the social graces and confidence of a toad, then reducing it down to a skill roll kind of makes sense. The same way your character can do a whole bunch of other things that you personally can't do. But I think you have to couple that with a little bit of rewarding effort, that sort of thing. If you want to generate your character randomly, there are a whole bunch of tables for character personality and so on, but to my mind they all seemed a little small, which I saw as a problem in the 5th edition as well. It's like, okay, I'm playing X character from X background. Here's a D4 or a D6 table for personality traits. You know, if you play for any length of time, that's going to come up more often than not, and it's not going to feel fresh and new or interesting. So I like the idea of the tables, but there's just not enough content in them, really. So what else is there to say here, really? Not releasing everything at the same time feels like a bit of a jip. And the trouble is that they're really competing against themselves with this release, I think. And by doing a staggered release, they're probably not going to make as much money as they would if they released the set all in one go. So business decisions, and otherwise it seems like an odd one, because what is this edition? What is the 2024 edition? What is 5.5 competing against? And for the most part it's competing against 5th edition, which is much more complete, albeit incompetently, in many degrees. So this is a problem that has always plagued D&D. It's always mostly in competition against itself rather than anything else, anyone else. Because this new edition cannot possibly compete with the completeness and the sheer scope and scale of 5th edition, with all the releases and books and support that has had. And it will take some time to even remotely catch up for the updated SRD to be released, all the rest of it. And 5th edition has an enormous fan base. Whether a new Pathfinder will emerge, continuity 5th edition or something, that remains to be seen as well. So I think there's a steep hill to climb before this edition feels like one that's worth buying into for most people. You know, I buy it because I might need it professionally, and from a game design perspective. But for other people, I don't think they have that same desire necessarily. So I'll leave scores till the end. There is more emphasis on feats, but it's not followed through on mechanically. In my experience, almost nobody takes feats. Some of these might be tied to character backgrounds and things, but in my experience, most people just take the attribute boosts. And while they've put more emphasis on the feats, I don't see anyone going back to 5th edition, to 3rd edition feat buying as a result of it. It's just some mild encouragement and no real mechanical impetus for you to do so. So, yeah. Alright, so I've been posting the little pie charts of my analysis of the artwork. It's all a bit tongue-in-cheek, but taken from real data. So what did we find through this? Well, medieval fantasy is gone. This is more like Renfair fantasy, which is a sort of COD fantasy where all kinds of stuff just kind of mixes together willy-nilly. The mixture of race types doesn't really make sense for a medievalist setting, but then that's no longer what they're going for. Doesn't make any sense for a Renaissance setting, but again, that's not really what they're going for. They're going for American cheesy Renfair, and in that context, the racial diversity and makeup of the illustrations kind of makes sense. It just doesn't necessarily make sense for a game world that's supposed to hang together. What I did notice was that Asians were fairly underrepresented in the art, so it's not quite the racial mix of metropolitan Los Angeles. But really notable by their absence were South Asian and Middle Eastern looking characters. Now, some of that might just be because they can be a bit racially ambiguous, because there is a lot of art that is different species from the game that don't have racial analogues to the real world, and a whole bunch of them were so ambiguous that they could maybe fit into several categories. So there's a whole bunch of unknowns. If you're looking for quasi-historically authentic sort of setting, this isn't it. So there's a bit of continuity from 5th edition in that. The shaved undercut is present, but less present than it has been in the past. There were about 8 illustrations like that. AI, if it's been used, wasn't particularly obvious. There were 7 or 8 illustrations that I felt were probably AI influenced or AI incorporating. There were not as many wheelchairs as you might have expected in a new edition. There was a considerable chunk of artwork that was twee and cutesy, about 30 odd pieces out of around 150 pieces. So maybe slightly less twee and cutesy than 5th edition, but that wasn't compensated for with a lot more dramatic, heroic looking art. There were only a couple of handfuls of pieces, 10 at the most, which you could interpret in that way. So that sense of adventure and danger and so on was lacking. The DreamWorks smirk appeared a large number of times, almost as many as the twee and cutesy sort of look. If you don't know what the DreamWorks smirk is, go look it up. But it is a plague on CGI animation from that house. Gender was fairly evenly split. Male presenting figures was about 160 odd, female presenting figures were about 140 odd, and indeterminate gender figures were about 30 odd, though the indeterminate figures tended to lean more feminine than male. So it doesn't particularly reflect the audience, which I think is 2/3 male last time I checked, but maybe it does better reflect the end of the 5th edition audience. I did notice a few things. There are older characters depicted, perhaps reflecting the aging audience for D&D and the aging demographics of society as a whole. That's a kind of diversity that we haven't seen outside of Wizards before. As I said, medieval fantasy is largely over. Any attempt at any sort of historical fidelity is pretty much gone. As I say, it's Ren Fair style art. The races or species, whatever you want to call them, they've lost not only their statistical identity to a large degree, but also their visual identity. Orcs especially seem to have been toned down, shifted, and humanized in kind of the opposite way to the way Klingons have been in Star Trek, to the point where they are basically olive-skinned people with an underbite now. You may have noticed the bear sex illustration a short while ago. So yeah, I guess they had to put that in there somewhere. Right, so wrapping up then. The too long didn't read is that this is organisationally and visually an improvement on 5th edition. It is a necessary restart. I don't know how successful it's going to be because it has to compete with itself and the far more complete 5th edition. If you want to get into the weeds about ambiguous wording on spells and so on, plenty of people are doing that. That's not really my area of interest. I don't think D&D knows what it is anymore, and that is the common thread running through the presentation and the text. Is it a twee Renaissance Lovefest simulator, or is it a game of story and adventure and danger and delving and all of that sort of thing? Style-wise, I give it a 4 out of 5 because you got to encourage them when they make positive changes that do make it a better book. For substance, though, I give it a middling 3, but a lot will depend on the other books, of course. This is just the player's guide. We don't have the DM's guide. We don't have the monster manual. We can't do a full comparison yet. They probably should have included Artificer as one of the core classes now, considering how many gadgets and guns and things are depicted and talked about. So yeah, 4 for style, 3 for substance. That's 7 out of 10. That's 3.5 out of 5. My scores run the full gamut, so 3 is considered average. So this is above average, but average is about where the industry standard product probably should be as a benchmark for others. Of course, that score is taking into account the sheer amount of money that Wizards has the resources at their disposal, though they have gotten rid of people who actually know how to make games now that these editions are complete. As to its wokeness, maybe slightly less than 5th edition. Like I say, I don't particularly care, and that art analysis was mostly for taking the piss, but I think it threw up a few interesting things. Ultimate test, I guess, is, am I shifting the tabletop plus D&D game over to this edition? Certainly not yet, not until we have something a bit more complete. And I think that is the problem, finally, that this faces. It's competing against itself. It's competing against 5th edition, which is much more complete. And it can't yet, not with one book. Zang.
Satana Station is an addition to Machinations of the Space Princess. It's a whole, sleazy space station, full of locations, services, adventures, and inspiration for your old-school space opera games. Over 100 locations, a bevy of non-player characters, and more plot hooks than you can shake an Arcturo Mega Stick at. Buy it at post-mort.com, drive-through RPG, and hard copy at lulu.com.